I'm Summer. Let's talk reptiles. So here's another video of why-based husbandry. Let's get it. So let's talk about how many reptiles should you have? And I think that question is subjective, obviously, because that answer is going to be different for different people. But I want to advocate for the idea that less is more. And I know that seems like a simple concept, right? The less reptiles you have, the easier it is to care for those individuals, blah, blah, blah. But let's talk about the idea of why one, from a concrete level, why-based level, why one is better than two, is better than three, is better than, you get what I'm saying. When you have one reptile, you can really dive into the nuances of that animal. What do I mean by that? I clearly am really into the idea of why-based husbandry. And what that means for me is I do a lot of research. I research their natural habitat, I research their behaviors, I read scientific papers, I do everything I can to learn about those individual animals. I, in all of my ADHD glory and all of my addictive personality glory, I am not ashamed to say any of these things. I have about 10 different species, maybe 11 different species of reptiles that I work with, right? I did like most people do. I got one. My very first reptile was a female nosy panther chameleon. I picked her up from the goat of nosy panther chameleons here in Northern California. And I was hooked. And from her, I got my first bearded dragon, and then another chameleon, and then another bearded dragon, and another chameleon, and it just snowballed from there, right? And my story isn't unique. My story is a lot of people's story when it comes to reptiles. And with all of those animals, because of my ADHD superpower, I was able to keep up from a knowledge-based level because I got obsessive, and I'm still obsessive, and all I did was research them and read about them and learn all the possible ways that I could care for them. But what happens when you continue to grow the group of reptiles that you're caring for is it becomes more and more difficult to evenly give all of those reptiles the same amount of care. Am I overwhelmed sometimes? Possibly, but because I don't know, like I don't know. I am overwhelmed sometimes. But at the same time, like I will sacrifice time with other things so that I can make sure that I'm giving the reptiles all the things that they need, right? Now, does that work for me? It does. It works fine for me. My partner is also into animals the way that I am. So it works for us because we can care for these things together, blah, 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 blah. I digress, getting back on track. But when you have one individual animal that's taking your financial resources, taking your time, all of those types of things, all of those important resources, then it is a lot easier to give that animal all the things that they need. You can have a single bearded dragon, and instead of giving it a 4x2x2, which I think is too small, you can give it, I don't know, a 6x3x3. You can give it a 8x whatever. You have the space to give it an enclosure that can truly give it room to roam and play and express itself in all the different ways that it wants to. When you have a single reptile, then you don't have to worry about things like, are you cleaning their enclosure often enough? Are you giving them enough time in terms of socialization? When you have 100+ different reptiles, I don't have 100+ different reptiles. I want to put that out there. But when you do have a lot of reptiles, then it becomes really difficult to give all of them time and attention. Now, let's keep this on track. Reptiles are not like dogs. They don't want you to cuddle them and play with them, but some of them want more time and attention and energy than others. Bearded dragons, for example, are a more intensive reptile. I find that uromastyx, depending on the personality of the individual uromastyx, they're also time intensive. One of my favorite uromastyx, my guy Patches, he is a awesome bicolor or ornata. Every time I walk into my garage reptile room, he's scratching at his glass and he wants to come out and play. And I oblige him every time he asks. I take him out, I let him roam around. If you saw my past video, he's also the guy that I took outside and he ran into my neighbor's bush, and I had to stick my hand into a very big, very pokey aloe vera plant to get him out. But I digress. So when you only have one reptile, then, or even 2 or 3 reptiles, it becomes a lot easier to really geek out on the care of that individual reptile and give them everything that they need to give them a proper home. A lot of times in this place, this world of reptiles, it becomes the norm. If you get 1, you should get 30. If you get like 1 species, you should get 5 species, right? And for me, one of the reasons why I have so many different species is because that is how my brain works. My brain really enjoys learning about different types of information, no matter what it is. Like if it's learning about my care for reptiles, if it's learning how to wire a solar electric system for a camper van. That guy, can we see it? Where is it? There it is. Learning how to wire a solar electric system for a van. My brain really loves that. It really loves doing all of those types of things. But for some folks, like, you may not have the time, energy to do that for all of these different species. And yeah, when you see a reptile that's incredibly cool that you have never heard of before, it gets really, really, really enticing to want to get that guy and learn about him. I'm in a place right now where I'm realizing I really want to hone in on uncommon species. And I've picked up some amoebas, which are blowing my mind. My dog is scratching on the door. Picked up some amoebas that are really blowing my mind, but there's very little information on how to care for giant amoebas. And like, I've been reading the scientific papers that I can find. They're from tropical areas like Costa Rica. And what I learned this week, because every night before bed I read scientific white papers, what I learned before bed yesterday is that even though they're from like places that are considered to be tropical, the specific species of amoebas that I have are arid. Mind-blowing. Now, if I wasn't making the time to read and learn about these animals, then I wouldn't have known that. And I would have been keeping them tropical due to the fact that the areas that they're from are tropical, and that wouldn't be right for them, right? But you have to have the time, energy, mental resources to invest that to learn about these different animals. And it's a lot easier to do that when you only have a few, right? And I'm finding now that I'm getting into more common or more uncommon reptile species, that trying to find the time to like really dive into these uncommon guys is getting more difficult. I've been seriously thinking about like no longer keeping my bearded dragons except for my Pagona barbatas. I just got a group of those guys and I'm so stoked because that's going to be my primary focus with bearded dragons, my Pagona barbatas, and providing those for the U.S. industry. But I digress again. We'll talk about that at another time. But I've been seriously thinking about moving on from bearded dragons and not really keeping bearded dragons anymore. I've also been thinking about moving on from my panther chameleons, even though I keep nosy folly or Faley or however you want to say it, however folks say it, and those are a more uncommon locale of panther chameleons. I've still been thinking about moving on from those and like moving on my breeding group of those guys, which are like, they're between the ages of like 4 and 2. So they're at prime breeding age right now. But I want to really hone in on the guys that are really catching my attention right now, right? And like, I have to be, one, fair to my animals, and two, like, fair to myself and my energies, and making sure that they're being cared for properly. So I make this video, long and rambly as it may be, to say that keeping one reptile could be better husbandry than keeping 2 or 3, and like really honing in on the species that make your heart sing, and like being okay with moving on the species that could get better care in other places is an okay thing. It's okay to have less reptiles. You don't have to have 1 million. You don't have to have too many. It's like, you don't, if you're asking yourself the question, do I have too many reptiles? Like, maybe you do, right? And like, it's okay. And a part of being a good reptile keeper, a part of having great husbandry, is asking yourself that question. Do I have too many reptiles? What does too many reptiles look like for me, right? And like, I've been thinking about that a lot lately, especially as my babies are hatching. This season, I did a couple of clutches of 75% red monsters. This will be the last season that I ever do any bearded dragons that are not at least partially barbata. And then I have my clutches of Uromastic eggs that started hatching last night, and this morning they were the cutest little littles I've ever seen, right? But I've been thinking a lot about that as my group of reptiles under my care are expanding through the process of like life and birth and hatching and all of that good stuff, right? So yeah, why-based husbandry, asking yourself why, is a big part of what that means to me, and like what I want to advocate for when it comes to other people and their thought processes about reptiles. When you decide you want to get another reptile, ask yourself why. Why am I getting this other reptile? What am I thinking? And asking yourself questions like, do I have the time resources to meet all of their care needs outside of your overall excitement? I truly believe that a lot of us in the reptile industry have ADHD, that wonderful, beautiful gift that is ADHD. But there's downsides that come along with our neurodivergent brains. And one of those things is that sometimes having ADHD can make us impulsive, and also make us a little bit obsessive, or a lot of it obsessive. And it could also make us like make decisions that in the moment we are just caught up in the dopamine of the decision that we're trying to make. And that's also super exciting, you know? So I think it's important to think about these things, think about them deeply, like look at ourselves as whole folks and ask ourselves why. Why are we making this decision? Why are we getting this reptile? Is it a great idea? Is it not? Yeah. So why-based husbandry, ask yourself why. And having more than why have like more than one? Why have more than 2? Why have more than 15? Why? What is your end goal? And are you capable of giving them everything they need? All right, that's it. I'm out.